exciting. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director for Academic Services and Client Success at Strut Learning. And we are going to talk about basically how do we build competency-based courses. Many people have taught online for many years. And as we kind of shift our thinking into competency-based, yes, competency-based has been around a long time, but when we've taken that into the online environment, we are going to talk a little bit about kind of those differences between maybe what it is to do a competency-based course compared to just an online course. But I have two amazing people with me, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I have Ashley Nelson, Dr. Ashley Nelson from Antioch University. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. As she said, I work at Antioch University. I'm the chair of the Individualized Masters of Arts program there, which is a self-directed master's program. And I am also been an instructional designer and a competency-based expert, I guess, for quite a while now. And I've been working with Rhonda for quite a few years now. So thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ashley. And we also have Lisa Steiner from University of Massachusetts Global. So I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. It's great to have you all here and be in this webinar with you. I apologize for the background noise. We had a leak, so if you hear anything, I do apologize in advance. As Rhonda said, I work at UMass Global. I've been in education for about 10 years. I've been in CBE for 7 of those 10 years. I'm an instructional designer, and I work on a variety of different competencies at UMass Global.
Wonderful. Thank y'all both. So yeah, we've all done instructional design within competency-based. I've been doing competency-based for about 10 years now. It feels like the time flies. So then I turn around, it's like 15 years, right? So it's crazy how quickly time goes by. But really trying to dig into all the different pieces of competency-based courses. And guess to kind of get started is really what is the difference between like competencies and learning objectives, or competency-based courses and a learning objective course. Trying to really figure out what are those different things that we need to be thinking about. It was funny because right before we got on, we were both Ashley, Lisa, and I were all kind of talking about, what are those differences? What do we kind of need to highlight? And really thinking about competencies as really making sure that as a student is going through and finishing that course, there is a skill set that they have. They have these abilities to be able to do something. Many times when we go through courses that are just online that aren't competency-based, you're really focused on what is that learning? What is the different materials and activities and assessments you can go through to make sure that they have learned the material, and but they may not always, and there are times that we do come out with skills when we do that, but many times it's really about that learning process more than about building those skill sets. And so I would like to start out with you, Ashley, to talk a little bit about, what in your eyes, when you are developing a competency-based course, what is the first thing that you think about and want to kind of focus in on as you're building that course from the beginning?
The first thing I think about is I go to the community experts and I ask them. So say, for example, when we were developing a management course for grocery managers, we went out to the grocery managers and we said, what are the most essential skills that you want people, entering management to know? Same thing when we're developing courses for like EMTs, emergency medical technicians. What are the competencies, that they need to know? That has more of like state board as well. And so we go back and forth between those two. What do they need to know for the test and the competencies for that test? But what do they also need to know that's in the field? Because those sometimes differ. And then say, for example, like police investigation, we did a competency for that. And so instead of like trying to understand what the textbook is, we actually go into the field and we talk to the people and we say, okay, someone that's starting, to start doing investigations, what do we need to know? What are the skills that are really essential to do the job well? So that's where
I love that. No, yeah, I love that. So, when we think about those competency-based courses, you're really thinking about, what are those skill sets that they're going to take to the field with them when they go. So, Cheryl comes and says, well, how do you handle gen eds? So Lisa, I'm going to kind of throw that one to you and see what y'all have done at UMass Global to kind of really look at those gen ed courses and how y'all looked at that.
Yeah, for us, we also go to the subject matter experts in that field. For example, we had, an effective communication course. So who is our subject matter expert for those? And then playing on what Ashley said, what do the students need to know? What skills, knowledge, abilities do they need to know for those courses? That's how we have done it in UMass Global. We're always looking to our subject matter experts. A lot of times it's our faculty members. They kind of cross over from the credit hour side. But, as we know, and you will probably know as well, the development is quite different from that. So that's how we handle that piece of it. I don't know if you have anything to add for that. Particular
yeah, it was interesting. We had a philosophy teacher and we were going to competency based, and it was a hard shift for that instructor because it went from just knowledge bits to actually like the ability. So we really were working on critical thinking versus just knowing the different names of the different philosophers. And so it was, as you said, skills, knowledge, and abilities, which it was great in the end. And the instructor felt much more freedom in their teaching because we shifted it to competency based. But it is really focusing more on the skills and the abilities. So that critical thinking, as you're saying, and effective communication.
So Monique, that's a great question. So basically, how do you get the data from the SMEs? And I think it kind of depends on what you're doing. When Ashley was talking about going out and looking at, talking to those grocery store managers, you're really collecting data in that way. Maybe it's having certain questions and filling out a survey yourself as you're talking to them, or even going to like EMTs and sitting down with those individuals and really kind of talking through what are those skill sets. You could also do it where you're actually hiring a SME to help you build a course. And so I think there's different ways that you can bring in that SME knowledge that to really get that subject matter, to make sure that you're hitting on those skills and those abilities that they need to make it through the particular course. And so, really trying to think about, so we talked about, getting started, really looking at those subject matter experts, and then determining those competencies, right? Really understanding what are those skills and abilities and knowledge that you need to do. And so you really hone in, you determine what those competencies are. From there, where do we go from there? What does that structure look like, Lisa?
Trying to unmute myself, sorry. So the structure of CBE is quite different from traditional online courses. So typically in your online course, there's a predetermined schedule, there's fixed start dates, fixed end dates, and deadlines for assignments, quizzes, exams, what have you. But in CBE, the timing is more flexible. So it'll be self-paced for our students, and it's focusing not so much on the deadlines and the quizzes and the knowledge piece of it. It's demonstrating the mastery of the competencies rather than this fixed schedule. So students can go through the course at their own pace, and they may already possess knowledge and experience in some of these competencies. So maybe they'll get through that piece a little bit quicker. So they really have control over their learning pace. And also with your credit-based courses, there's requirements of an institution, whereas in CBE, the completion, again, is based on demonstrating the mastery and the skills for that competency.
Yeah, and that's the great point, kind of that difference between the two. The structure of it can be somewhat rigid at times within a credit-based course, right, compared to a competency-based course, and giving the students the ability that if they know certain skills and they have the ability on certain things, they may be able to move faster through a particular skill set and get to a part that they may not be as confident with or comfortable with. I know that with CBE, one of the things that you can do is allow students to kind of demonstrate that knowledge even up front, depending on the type of program that you're putting together. But you could have students, I don't want to say test out of their knowledge, because that's probably not the best way of saying it, but being able to kind of show, okay, I know this, so maybe I can jump right to the assessment because I'm pretty confident in it, instead of knowing that I need to actually go through all the pieces of content to learn something and really get those skills to be able to then, okay, now I can demonstrate my knowledge. And through that process, you're still having that kind of back and forth between the instructor and the student as well, right? So there are times that you can create these milestones for students as they're going through that information. But I think going from those competencies, one of the things that I think is critical compared to credit-based, many times, unfortunately, with a credit-based course, we're giving the material, right? We're giving the book, and that your material is already there. So you then from there determine what are your quizzes that you're going to do, or what is the assessment you're going to do, and things like that. But with competency-based, we do it a little different, right? So we start with those competencies, but then we would go straight to figuring out how they are going to determine their achievement of that competency. So Ashley, can you talk a little bit more about that process that you would go through?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say in CBE, it's more about guidelines and deadlines. So we do help people in our structure give guidelines on if you want to keep on pace, but it's not deadlines like in a regular classroom. And then the other thing I wanted to say was it's not about seat time. It's about showing your ability. So it's really good for adult learners who bring in a lot of knowledge and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend 3 classes talking about something that I already know. And so with the CBE model, especially with Strut, it's really easy to just go straight to the assessment and be able to, show that you know this, so you don't have to go through all of the different content since they already know it. In terms of starting, so when I had those conversations with community experts and the SMEs, I ask them about projects a lot. So I say, when someone is a grocery manager, what are some of the tasks that they need to do? Or, same thing with the other ones that I've mentioned. And then we build a project accordingly. And so CBE is a lot about, you can have tests and quizzes, but the beauty of it is really having that project to demonstrate that learning. So we talk about the competencies, and then you say, well, how do you know when someone has reached that. And then they're like, well, if they can fill out this report, or if they can, do this certain type of speech, or if they can conduct an investigation, that gets a little bit more complicated, but a particular type of investigation. And so then we develop a project around that with a rubric and such, so then people can know exactly what they need to do. And then we design backwards, which I think Lisa wanted to talk about a little bit in terms of how we scaffold backwards from that end product.
Yeah. So doing backwards design in CBE is critical. And ideally, you would do it in credit base as well. But as Rhonda said, a lot of times the SME instructor faculty, they're starting with the textbook and they're building from the textbook. So in CBE, we want to know right away, what does the student need to achieve for this competency? What are the specific skills, again, the knowledge abilities that a student needs to achieve? And then when you begin with that in mind, you can work your way backwards. So going back to the effective communication course that I talked about earlier, let's say that the student has to, master verbal and nonverbal skills and active listening and interpersonal communication. So what does that look like? So really we want to look at that and what is their final project-based assessment going to look like that's going to help us build this competency. So instead of like organizing around topics, units, what we're going to do is we're going to align the final, we're going to align the content with that. And so that process, identifying the final assessment for us when I build a course, is going to help us build the content. And I find that for my SMEs, this is really difficult. It's been a difficult process to have them wrap their heads around. We have templates that we use, and in that template, like, we're asking them, what does your final assessment look like? And a lot of times we can't get that from them. They're going the other way. So it's been a struggle, but it really is critical to do that. We want to, define that, and then, okay, so what are our assessments going to look like? What are our resources going to look like that support, what we want the students to ultimately master?
That's great. So, one of the things when I'm working with faculty that I like to ask them is, if you're given a competency and you give the student the assessment and they're able to master it, you are 100% confident that they have actually met that competency. And because there's a lot of times that, and we've all done this, it's like, oh, I want them to be able to do this as a final assessment. I think that would really kind of show me. And then you have to really kind of break it down. It's like, well, these are the skills you said, or these are the competencies that you said. Is that being shown? If I actually use a criteria in my rubric that goes back to that skill, will you be able to say, inside this particular assessment, I can see that. I can actually, they are demonstrating that they do know that. And so I think it's kind of also that combination of not only the instructions and what the different things that they need to do in that assessment, but how are you actually grading that assessment? So Ashley, I'm going to kind of show that, give it back to you. If I can talk today. And I would like you to kind of talk a little bit more about that kind of assessment development grading piece of it, if you will.
And then someone just said, is there a minute to cover? It depends. That's a great question. It really depends on the course. Usually, there's no usual. Sometimes there's like a summative assessment where it's the whole entire comprehensive. And And so for some courses that makes sense. And then for others, it could be a series of final assessments. It really depends on the course. And I would love to see your templates if possible. I'll pass that back to you guys when that comes. But in terms of developing it's as we said, it takes a little bit for the instructors sometimes to understand this, because we're so used to textbooks, and we're so used to the chapter test, and we're so used to like breaking it down, and these are the different things, and then that's what we test on. But if you take it more as a competency base, it's more of a systemic view of the course. And so it's like over the whole course, what are the competencies? And then how would you assess that? So for certain courses, say, for example, speech, there's a general ed course. There are in Texas, community college level, there's a certain amount of particular speeches that you need to be able to demonstrate how to deliver. And so in that one, we would develop, the 3 different projects around those speeches. And then we would have this very particular rubric where it's each one of the skills that they need in order to do that. So it's not only like the outline of the core of the speech that it flows, and it's not only like the hook, and I'm getting very particular. Hopefully there's no speech experts here. And then it's like each one is like very different. And I'm trying to remember all the different ones. There's like one where it's like a speech that you would give at like a wedding. So like a congratulatory speech. And then there's like another one. Anyways, there's lots of different ones. But instead of having an overall assessment for the whole entire course, we have 3 different ones. And then say, for example, for trying to think of one that we had for the whole, for the management course, we had at the end, they needed to be able to do like a gap analysis, and they need to be able to figure out like the strengths and weaknesses. And so we had a whole entire project around that. And then, the rubrics are not like 3 lines. The rubrics can be, kind of long and have different sections of the rubric in order to really highlight each one of the skills. What's nice about Strut is they have a structure in which it's easy to put in these rubrics. And then what I love the most about it is that if a student doesn't do well on one of them, so say, for example, you go 1 to 4 and they get like a 1 or 2 on something, Strut is able to help that student identify exactly where that skill is in the content. So say, for example, they did not understand how to do a hook very well. So it will then direct the student directly to that section about the hook. And I'll talk about the little formative assessments that can help them develop their hook better. Maintain it. Yes, I just was talking about formative assess. Yes. So as part of that, that rubric, I spent a lot of time making sure that we have formative assessments to help that summative assessment. And if people are losing me, just let me know. But for each one of those, lines, we would have perhaps a formative assessment that helps develop that skill and scaffold it. So when they get to that summative, it's pretty fluid in terms of their knowledge and ability to demonstrate it.
Yeah, when you were talking, it reminded me of one of the courses that I was working with, that we had actually several summatives. So they weren't formative, they were actual summatives that the students had to master each one. But then there was an overall summative. So like there were 3 skills within this particular competency that they had to meet these particular skills. And each one of those skills was on a summative. But then at the very end of the course, they brought it all together into one big project to show that they could actually utilize each one of those skills together. And so I think that there are, like Ashley said, very different ways, depending on what the course is, on how you want to do that. But going back to what Denroy says is that, yeah, part of that could be a portfolio. So as a student's going through and showing their different skills and their different levels of maybe those skills too, they can be putting into this portfolio. And at the very end, I would still probably do an overarching summative assessment that brings every one of those skill sets together into a big project to show that, yes, this particular competency, they know that competency, or they have achieved that competency. But it's great that Denroy actually brought up formatives, and so did Ashley, because once you have those summatives, you know what you want your students to show achievement of that particular competency. There are ways to get them there, right? So I love at the very beginning, Ashley said, we're going to guide them through the process throughout the course, because formatives don't have grades to them. They, you don't really achieve a formative, but it does help you understand where you are with that particular piece of maybe an ability or a skill as it's guiding you through that process. So there's lots of different types of formatives. And so, Lisa, can you talk to us a little bit about the different types of formatives that you could utilize as you're building out your content?
Yeah, and I love that you did bring up the portfolio, because one of the competencies I worked on, it was a literacy competency for teachers that are working in the field. And for this particular competency, the summative was a portfolio. So throughout the competency, the formatives were doing pieces of this portfolio so that they were learning these skills as they went along, and then it culminated in the portfolio. And along with that, summative, it was also, I think it was, they had to create a video and talk through their portfolio. But going back to the formatives, doing those pieces of the final project or final assessment is one of the formatives. And I think that's great. We just redid the MBA program, and the milestones, which Strut has built in, and they're great. They're checkpoints throughout to gauge knowledge. All of the milestones in that program, the MBA program or competency, had to be the formative had to be scaffolded into the final assessment. So that is one of them. We also have quizzes. You can do quizzes for your formatives. Your reflections can be part of that. And like Rhonda said, they aren't graded, but it's very important to have those, because you're giving the student timely feedback on that and making sure that they're on track for their learning and mastering that skill. And then, you can also do discussions that can be part of it as well. So very important. Formatives play a crucial role in CBE.
Yeah, and I love that when you were saying, actually scaffolding them through that process, right? So you may start off at the very beginning, you may even start off with almost like a pre-quiz, right? Let's see what you know. And depends on the level, if you're at a freshman, undergraduate level, or even community college level compared to like a master's level. So, the courses would differ in what they look like, but you could start them off by saying, okay, let's see what you know. And then you can, within that formative, I think, Ashley, you even said it, that like in Strut, you're able to link that information to where it is in the content. So that way you're like, I missed this question. Where do I need to go? You can give them feedback and then say, hey, go over here and learn a little bit more about it. And then they can take that quiz again. And, they obviously it's a formative, so they can take it as many times as they want and see what they know. But I do love that idea of, okay, we're going to start you here, and then you're going to go through maybe some of the content, and maybe I'm going to, as a SME or a faculty member, I'm going to give you a prompt to reflect on something, because now this gives you an opportunity to go back and think about it a little bit more. Or maybe it's, like Lisa said, maybe same thing in the discussion, or that milestone check, or communication with the faculty member. So Ashley, I don't know if you want to add any more about any of that formative and guidance.
Yeah, I thought of examples, of course, afterwards. So say, for example, we were doing one for, it was something around like disability accommodation. So it was training teachers how to have, and the competency was an effective accommodations meeting with a parent. And so, when the students come in, that might sound like, wow, I don't, how am I going to do that? But that was kind of the final project because it was a summative project. And then we scaffolded it with a bunch of different formatives to slowly help the student understand how to get to that final competency. So we did have things like we had minor quizzes actually to help them understand the laws and make sure that they understood those different things, and then we had discussions about like different ways of actually delivering different tests, right? Administering them. And not only like not the skill per se, but even just like how do you approach the child and like make sure that they feel comfortable and what does that mean and what is your experience in taking tests so then people can understand better how to make the child feel more comfortable. So we know discussions for that, and it's always interesting to hear other stories, so it really like enlivens the class a lot. And then you have reflecting your own, and so we brought in reflections on that. So then they slowly were able to, or quickly, because it's CBE, right, to be able to get to that final assessment that was a summative. Another one that I was thinking about was Psychology 101. There was one where it was a summative assessment that brought in like almost everything. So the assignment was basically raise awareness of a mental health issue. And so if anyone knows Psych 101, right, that covers the abnormal section. It covers memory and learning. It covers sensory perception, right? It covers a lot of different, quote, topics, right, the chapters, but it does it in a way that it's more systemic. So the student sees that through psychology, they're not only able to understand the knowledge, but they can critically analyze something and then they can articulate. And of course, I'm like, now what does it say in the chat? Rhonda, do you want to take it? I can take a
So that's a great question. And I think that one of the things with competency based is that it is about mastery. And what is your idea of what mastery looks like? Is that understanding 90% of or having 90% of the skill set that you need, or is it 80%? And it could also be that if you have more than one summative, you might be able to say that, these three summatives were kind of smaller because they were looking at kind of what I was talking about. Okay, these three right here, they would have to go through and do each one of the skills, but then there's an overarching summative at the very end that may be worth more. So you could actually look at how they do on each one, and that can translate to a grade. But it sometimes definitely goes back to the policies that your institution comes up with. So definitely relying on how they would like to translate that information is always critical. And because there are some others that they mastered or they don't master it. It's basically, it's pass or fail. Because if they master it, then they have that skill set. Sometimes it's easier to do with professional development than it is with the credit-based course. but yeah, I would definitely go back to the institution to talk about how they want to handle that.
On a side note on that, I don't know if this is at all helpful, but yeah, when I work with instructors, there's some who are like, if they don't know this skill, they should not pass the course. And they say sometimes what happens is in the credit-based courses, they have their tests or whatever, and they get a 70 on each one, and then they pass the course, but they never actually did the competency that they wanted because of the way that the grading is working. But with CBE, you can really make it so if you don't know that particular competency, you don't pass the course. And so you need to keep, working on it. We use the not yet versus fail in competency based. So they haven't achieved it yet. And so then they can keep working on it until they achieve it. So I don't know if there's any instructors out there that just get really frustrated that once someone finishes a course, they still don't know what they need to know. In CBE, that does not happen. You're able to really design it so they know exactly what you feel like they need to know.
Yes. And yes, that I love that, Ashley. And so does Monique. And yeah, and the other part, I think, really kind of honing in on that is, you're thinking about those skills, those different skills that may then culminate into a particular competency. And, you know, if you have someone that is taking blood and they don't know, they know how to do like 2/3 of taking blood, do you really want them taking your blood, right? So when they go through your competency based program, you know that they know how to actually do every step and every task and skill to be able to do that particular competency. So I think that's also kind of a way to think through that. And so, Dan Adrian, I wish I would have had you on our committee here to do this, because that would have been an amazing way of actually showing how to put a CBE course together, or the philosophy. We could have definitely started off when you start this seminar. This is the competency you're going to get out of it.
I just wanted to add to Rhonda onto that, back to the formatives. For us, for UMass, for the courses I work on, most of our formatives are in the milestones. And as I talked about before, the scaffolding piece of it. And they are tied back to what they've learned in the topics, the activities, and going back to what Ashley said, you can actually see in Strut what it's tied to, what they should be, have read or done, or, what topic activity. So for us, before they can move on in Strut, you can also lock it. So they can't move on to the next activity until the instructor provides feedback and affirms that formative. So they're not graded, but they have to affirm it before the student can move on. And I think that's great that the student's getting that one-on-one with the instructor. They're getting feedback from an expert, and that's not something that you get in a traditional online course. So I just wanted to add on to that.
No, that's great, because that definitely takes us to that substantive interaction, right? When you are going through accreditation, and I don't care what accreditation you're going through, they're going to expect substantive interaction between the faculty and the student. And building that into the structure of the course, I think, is not only beneficial to the student as they're going through, but it really helps you as an institution, as a faculty member, whoever, as the department, know that when they get to certain pieces of that course, that they have built up that skill set to move on to the next thing. And so I love that, Lisa. And Ashley, I don't know if you would like to add more about substantive interaction there.
I was just thinking an example. I'll go back to that speech class where, the whole stopping. So a lot of times what the speech instructor said is the student gets up to give the speech and it's not on topic. They don't have all the session elements. And so with Strut, you can organize it so there's one formative assessment on the hook, right? Or on the actual topic of the speech. And the student, you can make it so the student has to get some sort of interaction from the instructor, right? The instructor gives feedback, so then they can move on. And they said that it helped so much because they were able in the beginning to help the student start structuring the speech. So then when it got to the final, it was actually on topic and it was, appropriate, had all different elements. So we structured it in a way where there's a lot of different formatives and milestones. So then they would constantly get that feedback and that substantive feedback. And so I don't know if there's instructors here or not, but it's really helpful to be able to help in the beginning and make sure that they kind of just stop and like make sure that they're right on track first before they go down the wrong track. Because that happens way too often.
So Denroy, I think that your question, your comment is really on track with what CBE is about, right? So if they actually show that maybe there's 4 skills that they need to show that will demonstrate that they have mastered that competency, then and they only have 3 of the 4 and they haven't finished this one, kind of going back to a little bit of what Ashley and Lisa said earlier, is that no, they have not met that, right? They need to go back and make sure that they can demonstrate that. I know you're talking about different probably competencies with math and visual arts and things like that, but would they be able to graduate if they don't have that particular one? And with competency based, you would definitely say no. You would say that they need to show competency, achieve competency in all of the areas before they can graduate.
And yes, Monique, a good class would have segments for culminating projects. I guess I was referring more to the way in which Strut is designed to help the instructor and the instructional designer be able to have more flexibility on how that is designed. So I say it in a different way. It really helps the student show the flow. And so they know exactly, that they need to do this in order to do that. And then also, because it's CBE, we're also able to, if they're working on that and waiting for feedback, they can move on to another competency, an assignment. Help me out here. I'm not using my words well.
No, and I think that I agree. So I can tell you that my credit-based courses have gotten better since I've been developing CBE courses, because I have taken some of the concepts of CBE and put them into my credit-based courses, because I have actually just what Ashley did. I used to have this assignment or, this kind of summative assignment that they were supposed to do. And, I had all the instructions there and I had the rubric, but there was this one piece, and it was one of the very beginning pieces that they kept messing up on. So I kind of pulled it apart and had them kind of go through the different skills and steps that they need to do to get to where I needed them to be to show that they knew what they were talking about. And so I definitely think traditional courses can definitely learn from CBE. Just like when I started teaching online, my face-to-face courses actually got better as well. So I think we all can learn from one of the techniques from the other. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Ashley. Okay.
There's something about competency scales. Did you mean like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? Is that what you mean by a competency scale?
Yes.
Most of the programs I work on, it's a 4-point scale. It gets a little bit more complicated when it becomes 5-point. So yes, beginning, emerging,
are not met. 4 is usually, I would say, the most common. I have seen a couple that do 3, and I have seen people do 5, but 4 is usually the standard that a lot of people use.
We use 4 as well. Ours are exemplary, proficient, emerging, and I cannot think of the last one. But in order for students to pass our competency, they have to get exemplary or proficient. And so our rubrics are weighted the same for each criterion throughout, so all of the proficient are weighted, all of the exemplary, but we use 4 as well.
And I was going to say, I've had one that's 2, where it's either you did it or you didn't. And that was like fire technology. Like either you can put on your suit or you can't. There's no gray in that. Either you're going to be alive or you're going to be dead, right? If you can't put the suit on correctly. So they're like, no, we don't want 4 points. Like we need it either they do it or they don't. I was like, no, I get that. We're doing it. So it depends.
Yeah, no, I love that, because there are times, especially if you're thinking, because competency based obviously does not have to be online, right? It can be face to face. We're not, it looks maybe a little different at times when you're in a traditional setting than online, but there are things like Ashley said, if you can't do it, you just can't do it. If you don't put your suit on right, or if you don't put your hat, you're going to suffocate and you're going to die. We don't want that. And so, but I think when it comes to some of the others more out of the CTE programs, then I think we can get more into that 4 level.
In terms of rule of thumb for the amount of supplemental material, no. I mean, as a designer, I don't want to overload them in terms of their cognitive load when they're looking at all of the materials. So I try and balance it that way. So it's not like overwhelming. Even if I'm like optional, or supplemental, I still don't want them to feel overwhelmed. So in that sense, that's kind of a rule of thumb. But I have found that sometimes when we're developing these courses and we do have the supplemental materials, the students have feedback where they're like, thank you so much for giving me the option to dive deeper. That was really exciting for me. It gave me lots of those options.
Yeah, I would definitely balance like between kind of what you feel is required for them to know the material and stuff to let them get a little deeper into the material, or even you can also do it both ways, right? So here's what the student has to learn, and this is what they have to learn to make sure that they can achieve that competency. But if they're not here yet, here's some things to get you here. And if you already here and you really know this really well, but you would like to know more, here's some stuff so you could kind of tell it on both ends. So supplemental material can do well on both ends. But you also, there are some students that will look at everything no matter what, and you just kind of have to help them digest and say, these are things that you definitely need to, this will get you there. These are other things, are just things that are good to have, I guess.
And that was really true. There was a math course that we were doing, and we had a bunch of supplements where like, if you forgot how to, ... right? And then we put a bunch of supplements because, sometimes you forget certain things in math. And so there's a lot of supplements to then help scaffold.
Yeah, math. And I actually had a science, I want to say it was a physics instructor, that what he realized is that students were not doing well because of the math portion of it, not because they didn't understand the competencies of the science. They got that, but they kept messing up because of the math. And so he would here's all the stuff to make sure you understand the math. When you get this, come over here, because you'll really be able to show your mastery over the actual concept that I'm asking you to do. So, yeah, and I think that when you're putting together your program and the different competencies, you can definitely have maybe a beginning competency that once they mastered this, then they're prepared for this one, and then they can go into that. So also being able to scaffold the competencies, I think, are really important as well. So the students aren't jumping to something that they shouldn't be in first. They need to be able to, and yeah, I have to say that Strut has created a way for you to scaffold different courses or competencies together and release them as the students are going through that material. So it makes it, you're confident then that they understand, or they have the skills for this before they can do this. So, and I think that's what you're asking, didn't Roy, if I'm not mistaken. So.
And I think that's also why when you start competency-based, sometimes instead of just looking at the one course, you look at the whole entire major or the certificate or the program that you're part of. So then you can design accordingly. Because there's nothing worse than having the whole program that you're designing and only working on one and then realizing, wait, that's actually should have been like the second level competency. Or when you get to the second level, whoops, we forgot one in the first. So you really need to see it as a whole system.
Yeah.
And
And I really like that, because being able to get with, say, all the faculty that are part of a program and sit down and as a team determine what are the competencies for that. If someone graduates with this degree, what are the competencies they need to have that degree? And then kind of the backwards design at the program level. We kind of talked about this last month, but being able to kind of look back and say, okay, now here's the competencies. What order do these need to go in? And then once they're there, how are you going to assess them? And then from there, what is, so it's like really kind of starting bigger, but that backwards design all the way and to get to the very minute skills that they need to know for each one of those.
We do that as well, of course, but just wanted to add in maybe a little tip. If you're designing a program, what we do is we have a program map, an alignment map. And so everything is at a bird's eye view. And so we will fill that in and put what are the final assessments for each of these competencies. And we can kind of map it that way. So just to add on to what you said, Rhonda, it's very useful to have that.
Yeah, and then you know for a fact that when students are graduating with a particular degree, they actually have all of the skills and competencies they need when they go into the workforce, right? And especially if you have alignment with the industry around you. So if you're talking about grocery management, it's like, well, now you have all these different grocery stores that need managers. Those people hopefully will be able to go right into where they are, because that's the competencies that were expected when they were graduating from college. And so being able to have that alignment with your community and all the industries in your community with those competencies are beneficial, not only to obviously you as an institution, but all the students that are graduating from that.
And just a random side note, real quick, in terms of career development, a lot of the CBE courses that have this project at the end that talks about the competencies, the students are then able to articulate what they know in a way in which their potential employers can hear it. And then they can actually show, like almost through a portfolio, see, this is what I did. I've already done that. I've done it in a course, blah, blah, blah. And it really helps get jobs. I mean, it's as simple as that. I've seen quite a few students use those final projects as, cover letter conversations and actually portfolios to show future employers.
Definitely. And so one of the things also, and I know we talked a little bit about this last month, so if y'all want to talk, learn more about program development, that was our webinar last month, and it is on our website. But being able to get started at a smaller level, you can think about micro credentials and how can you pull like this competency, and this competency together. If you do those three competencies, and you get this particular micro credential, and it could be more professional development. And then as you as an institution continue to build that out, then you can then hopefully go through the accreditation program. To get accredited for that program as you go, and you already have all the courses developed, and you have those different sets and those micro credentials, and be able to get the degree. So I think there's a lot of different ways to come about this. You don't have to go, oh, we have to do this entire program at one time, but you can definitely think about it as a bigger program, but you don't have to tackle it all at the same time when you're looking at that. And also, so just to let y'all know, next month, we're going to be looking specifically at assessments, and we may even bring in some AI experts to see what that looks like at that level too, since, Chat GPT out there is at 4.0 and it's keep growing, and how does that impact us as academics, and the different projects and papers and stuff that we are putting together. And so we're going to look at that along with just assessment development itself. So hope y'all can join us there. I don't know, Ashley and Lisa, if there are some closing thoughts that you would like to give everyone, maybe a tip that you would, I mean, y'all have given a lot of those, but any lasting final thought that you would like to provide?
I'll go. I have one that popped in my head. I know when we began, I said you start with the community experts and the SMEs, but I also realized I actually talk to alumni of programs and I say, where did we miss, right? What skill did you really need that we missed? And it's been very valuable to then go back and be like, okay, yeah, we need to bring in that competency. We didn't think about that. And then we've designed courses accordingly in the program for that. So,
Well, that's amazing. I love that. And Lisa?
Mine isn't so much a tip. Maybe. I know that earlier someone asked to see the templates and we didn't have time and can't really show those anyway, but I think it is important as an instructional designer, as an institution, to have those in place for your program. So I mentioned the map, you have your map, and then you have the specifics of what you're going to need from your subject matter experts for those competencies. Really quick, we have 4 steps. We have a course design document, which is like the overall high level. And then we have, what is it? It's a LAD. It's a learning
activities.
Yes, for the learning activities. And then we have one for the milestones and we have one for the project assessment. And I think having it chunked out that way is a huge help, not only for if you're an instructional designer, but for your SME as well.
Definitely. And I mean, I would say that especially that communication between the instructional designer and the SME is, and that type of document is critical, because to make sure that things are going in the way that you're expecting them to go in. At Strut, we make sure that all of our instructional designers have that capability to, or have those documents to be able to work with each of our SMEs as we're going through. And I definitely want to thank everyone, especially Ashley and Lisa, for coming on and talking with us about CBE course design. And I hope that to see y'all in a future session. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.